This episode of Literary Treks is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and to help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading, in case I got bored.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Literary Treks, Trek FM's dedicated books and comics show. I'm just one of your hosts, Dan Gunther, and with me, as he is every week, is the wonderful, the bright, the brash, the young, the amazing Bruce Gibson.
Ooh, I like the young part in there, too.
I thought you'd appreciate that.
I am young. I'm young at heart. And I do feel bright. I'm just shining today, feeling good. I'm ready to do this show. I'm so excited, as always.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm definitely excited because, I don't know, looking at the number for this episode, just to start with, 199, like that's a big number. Like you and I haven't been doing this the whole time, but we've done our fair share.
Oh, I'm glad you said that because I was rattling my brains today going, because I have multiple brains. I'm rattling my brains today and I'm thinking, it doesn't feel like I've done 199 shows. This is incredible. Time has just flown by. But like you just pointed out, I haven't been here for 199. So now that makes sense.
And neither have I. I've been here for a few more than you, but still nowhere near 199. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, but anyway, 199, that's a good one. That's a good number. I wonder what the next one's going to be. Yeah,
I don't know. I've never counted this high before, so I'm not sure where it goes from here. Does it just, because that's a pretty big number. Does it just reset back to zero? I think that's how numbers work, right?
Well, this isn't Mathematic Treks, okay?
We need Amy back on.
We need Amy to do that. So this is all about literature. This is our literature class right now, not our mathematics class, which is funny because math was always my best subject, not literature. So why not? Why not? I'll do a literature podcast. Sure.
Only your teachers could see you now. The thing that I just is a revelation to me is you're telling me you have multiple brains. Like, do you work for the iMorgue? Like, whose brains are those? You should give them back. You didn't steal Spock's, did you?
No, I didn't. I just go based on what other people tell me. I know I have a brain up here at the top of my head, but then there's other times people make comments as if I'm sitting on my brain. So I figure I've got a brain on top and one on the bottom.
Oh, okay. All right.
And that would make two. I counted. That's math.
No comments on which one you use the most, right?
That is correct. And when I have a headache, it's on the top. So I don't know what that means, but I'm just saying. That's awesome. My main brain.
Well, I think regardless of what exactly the number of the next episode is, I think you, dear listener, are going to be pretty happy with what we have lined up. We got some surprises. I don't know how much we want to give away, but yeah, we got some fun stuff coming up, I think.
Ooh, some surprises. Oh, come on. Just tell me what you got me. Just tell me.
Actually, to be totally fair, I was really hoping you'd planned something because I got nothing. I don't know.
Oh, well, at least we got each other the same things.
Oh, well, it's exactly what I've always wanted. That's great.
Oh, wow. We might as well go to the news then, right?
I think that works. We do have a couple items in the news today too. Some big news coming from Comic-Con. Of course, the San Diego Comic-Con happened recently, and besides all the big, new trailer for Star Trek Discovery and all the other really great Star Trek stuff there, we got some updates on the IDW Star Trek line from SDCC. So Bruce, why don't you share what we learned from Comic-Con there?
I found an article from Newsarama that was doing a really good job at blogging of what was going on at that panel with IDW Publishing. And they wrote about Discovery and how it's written by Discovery staff writer Kirsten Beyer and Mike Johnson. We know those two. And with art by Tony Shasteen. And this is due out in October. And they say it's so secret. The projected image says we can't show you much more yet. Johnson said the goal is to expand upon the story readers will see in the TV show. Klingons will be involved, he added.
Excellent. That sounds really exciting. So much Discovery coming, and it's all going to kind of drop at once. The new show, and then the new novel by David Mack, and then this comic series coming in October. I mean, do you ever just stop and think, like, there's a lot of people complaining out there and there's all that stuff, but, shoving that to one side, can we just reflect on the fact that there's a new Star Trek series coming in less than 2 months, or almost exactly 2 months? And, some of it's being written by some huge names like Kirsten Beyer and Nicholas Meyer. And man, it's a great time to be a Trekkie, isn't it?
It is. It actually reminds me of 1987 when The Next Generation was premiering. Now, I was not a Trekkie back then. I really wasn't that much into Star Trek. I really only cared for the movies. And of course, at that point, there'd only been 4. But I remember coming home from college. Yes, I was in college in 1987. Thank you very much. I came home for college at my parents' house, and I remember the show was going to premiere, if I remember correctly, Sunday at 4 o'clock. It was a 2-hour episode, of course, of the premiere of Encounter of Farpoint. And I just remember that whole thing of, wow, Star Trek back on TV. That's incredible. It's been forever. And now, that went for years and years and years, new series kept coming up, but we never had a break. And now we've had a 10-year break. No, I'm sorry, a 12-year break. And it's that feeling again of, wow, Star Trek's coming back to TV. But, The Next Generation looked different from the original series. And so now when I look at Discovery, I think, it looks a lot different from, TNG and DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. So we won't get all into that. But I keep having to remind myself, not only are we getting the new series, but, oh yeah, we're going to get novels. I'm saying that plural. I don't know anything, but I know we're getting at least one novel. And I think I did hear we're getting a second one. But anyway, we're going to get multiple novels. I don't know where I heard that. Maybe it was a rumor. But I was, and then of course we have these comics coming. It's like, wow, we're getting novels and comics and a series, and it's all tied together. This is, you're right, exciting time.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm totally psyched. I was kind of one of those people that was a little cautious, a little holding back. I wasn't negative about anything, but, I was like, okay, let's wait and see. But I do have to say now I'm just fully shifted into totally psyched, totally pumped for all of this new Star Trek coming. There's no coming back from this. I'm there.
Yeah, I know I'll enjoy it. I mean, if it turns out not being all that great, oh well. We'll get another one sometime. I mean, I'm just like, we're always getting novels and other things in Star Trek. I mean, but it's going to be good. I know it. So
absolutely.
We have another comic news here from San Diego Comic-Con International. We have an upcoming arc for Star Trek Boldly Go will be IDIC, which will include multi-dimensional versions of the crew, such as evil Mirror Universe Kirk, which is funny because we're going to talk about an evil mirror universe Kirk in the feature about Preserver. We have an AI version of Star Trek and a Kirk that was raised as a Klingon.
Excellent. So yeah, we talked about the cover for this in the last episode, and now we finally get what that meant. We had that kind of different pie slice versions of Kirk's face, and So it's not just, one mirror universe evil Kirk. It's all these different iterations, I'm thinking the idea of like the different quantum realities, like in the TNG episode Parallels with Worf jumping to different ones. We're going to get, different versions of the rebooted Star Trek universe, the Kelvin timeline. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So this would be Kelvin evil mirror universe Kirk and Kelvin Klingon Kirk and whatever and so on and so forth. It gets all confusing, but it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this one.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, this looks really excellent. Well, we do also have, speaking of comics, a new comic to talk about this week, and that is the latest issue, whatever, of Boldly Go. So this is issue number 10, and it features, interestingly enough, a character that we saw briefly at the end of Star Trek Beyond, and he gets his own story. And that character, of course, is the world-renowned, very well-known, very popular Kevin. You guys remember who I'm talking about here? About knee-high, not very fond of pants, as I recall.
Yes, Kevin doesn't wear pants. Neither does Donald Duck, but
yeah.
this
but he's
Donald
still
Duck.
very bashful when he comes out of the shower and wraps that towel around himself. So, yeah.
That's right.
Maybe, I wonder if Kevin's the same way. I wonder if he comes out of the sonic shower and is like rushing to grab a towel to cover himself, even though he never wears pants.
You didn't see that panel in the comic?
I must have missed that somehow.
All right, Dan. So tell me, I'm dying to know, what did you think of this one? First impressions and last impressions.
Okay. So reading this one from start to finish, I have to say, I loved it. I thought this was hilarious. I really, really enjoyed this one. It doesn't seem like one that I might enjoy, but I loved the jokes. We're going to give a little bit away from this comic. It's a standalone. I don't think they're continuing this story directly in the next one, but we have these aliens. They're the aliens we saw right at the beginning of Star Trek Beyond. They're the ones that Kirk's negotiating with, and then they end up attacking him, and he beams back aboard with a couple of them on his back. One of them ends up sticking around, and we see him at the end, like I said, of Star Trek Beyond, and his name is Kevin. Now, I might be wrong about this, but I seem to remember the story was that it was kind of an ad-libbed line that Chris Pine called him Kevin.
I think I remember hearing that too, that it wasn't written in the script. I think he threw that in.
Yeah, because the entire line was he walks by and Kirk looks at him and says, "Oh, still not wearing pants, I see, Kevin," or something like that. Or, "Kevin, still not wearing pants, I see," or something like that.
Yep.
And I love that like spawned this whole story and just that little tiny scene. And we get to know Kevin and meet him. And of course, the leader of his planet, the Grand Autarch, Steve.
Well, now we have to clarify what we learn is they're called Kevin and Steve because us humans cannot pronounce their names.
Right. Yeah. And that they're saying that's the closest they can come to the proper pronunciation, which, as far as explanations go, I love it. I think that's great. No, this one, it felt tongue in cheek to me the whole time. And I was okay with that. Like, it was fun. It wasn't taking itself seriously. It was obviously laughing at itself. And I can really appreciate that. I really got behind this story. I thought it was a lot of fun.
I didn't know what you were going to say. I didn't know if you like this or not. So
yeah, and I'm equally curious. I have no idea what you think of this story.
You know what, Dan? I have to tell you. You and I are a lot alike, but when it comes to comics, we're still a lot alike because I loved it too.
Okay, good.
I was already thrilled to see that was about Kevin. I was like, oh, good, because I wondered what is Kevin doing there and what's going on with him, and we get a little story of what's happening to Kevin after we saw him in Star Trek Beyond. And you're right. It's very fun, tongue-in-cheek. If you like the first scene in the movie, This feels the same way. It has that fun, adventure. I could hear these creatures talking in that low voice, but then being really small at the same time. And it was just, and the fact that, his name's Kevin. And I mean, probably the thing I laughed the most about was when, the leader, whatever, shows up and he's real mean. And, he says, oh, my name is Steve. And I'm like, really? Steve?
I am Steve. It's great. Oh, it's great stuff.
And that Kevin's also working on the new Enterprise, helping them build it. And who's he working with? But Keenser. I mean, perfect. The two of them are just, pals together. And I just love it. It's just, there's so much fun to this. And then we throw in Scotty. He comes to visit, which is the one thing that annoyed me a little. I shouldn't say annoyed. One thing I didn't like is that Scotty is not involved in this project of building a new Enterprise. He's teaching at Starfleet Academy. And I felt like I would think Scotty would be there while the Enterprise is being built and overseeing that whole project and not being on Earth teaching at the Academy and occasionally coming every few months to just check on things. But, I guess that's how it is. But I'd like to think that Scotty's there,
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of would track with what we know of the Prime universe, too, of course. Scotty in the motion picture oversaw the refit of the original Enterprise and all that stuff. And in Star Trek 3, he was so keen to stick around and help with, the refit that he thought was going to be happening there. Yeah, it makes sense that Scotty would want to stick close to his baby and, shepherd the Enterprise from start to finish here kind of thing.
Yeah. But that's just a little quibble that I had on that one. But I mean, adding Scotty in, Scotty was written perfectly. I mean, I could hear the lines just as if it was really Scotty talking.
Steve? That's amazing. Hail, Steve. Yeah.
And you know how Scotty's
I do not accept your fealty. You are not worthy. Oh, well, glad that's settled then. It's just, the Simon Pegg version of Scotty is just, yeah.
Oh, man, you can so hear that. Here. You can so hear Simon Pegg. And, I love in the movies where Scotty's always telling Keenser, get down. And then we have Kevin up on, the console and he's like, all right, Kevin, no sitting on the consoles. It's like Scotty just has a problem with people sitting on things.
Yeah. And I don't want to totally ruin this comic because it is definitely worth picking up. You should grab it. Like I said, it's fairly standalone. You don't have to have read any of the series prior to this, or I'm assuming after this to enjoy it. It doesn't leave a cliffhanger or anything like that. You should grab it. These alien beings end up kind of hatching a bit of a scheme against the Federation by stealing what they think is their seat of power. So I won't say any more about that. You should definitely check it out. And
perfect way to say it.
It's a lot of fun. And I did see actually on Twitter that I think Sarah Gatos was saying this was a particular favorite of hers that she edited for the IDW line. So it's a lot of fun. So much fun.
It is. And again, Scotty, I'm just reading, I won't even read the whole line, but he refers to the one leader of what are they called? The race. It's the,
I was trying to remember.
But he calls, little frog, when he gets mad at them. It's just, it's just so much. And Admiral Paris from the Yorktown is here. So yeah, this is definitely a must.
The Phoenibians were the other alien race. These guys were the Tenaxians.
That's it.
The Tenaxians. Like Talaxians, but not quite.
Right. Like Talaxians without pants.
And much smaller. Well, with all of that aside, I'm glad we both enjoyed that one because I was worried. This is one that I feel like if someone's expecting a really serious, really gritty Star Trek story, they might be disappointed, but just let yourself enjoy this one. This one's a lot of fun, and I'm really glad we both liked it. So
yeah, absolutely, good stuff. Yeah. So that's issue number 10.
Issue number 10. Yeah, we're already a fifth of the way through what the run of the ongoing series was, right? It was 50 issues, I think.
I think it was 60.
60. Oh, we're 1/6 of the way through. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. I hope this one runs as long as that one did, at least, because if this is any indication, these are a lot of fun.
60 or beyond.
Exactly. Well, with all of that said, what do you say we head to our feature and talk about Preserver by William Shatner?
Yes, let's do it.
Well, over the course of a number of episodes of Literary Treks, we have talked about the William Shatnerverse novels, or the Shat narrative, as a friend of mine calls them. Ashes of Eden, The Return, Avenger, and then now we're on the second trilogy, the Mirror Universe trilogy, with the final book of those 3 books that make up that set. So tonight we are talking about Star Trek Preserver by William Shatner, along with help by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens. So, first impressions, where we're at in the Mirror Universe trilogy here. How have you been enjoying this trilogy so far, where we find ourselves at the beginning of this novel?
I've liked the trilogy. I think I mentioned on the previous book, Dark Victory, that I read the first 2 books when they came out, but for some reason I never read this last book. I don't know why. I think one reason is because I always thought the cover wasn't as good as the other covers. I mean, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I think when it came out, because at the time, I was really more conscious about money than I am now, but I wouldn't buy the hardcovers. I wait for the paperbacks. And I think by the time the paperback came out, I may have lost interest, and the cover just didn't interest me that much, and I just passed it by. So I never read it. So rereading the other 2 was interesting because I'm revisiting things I've read before. But now when I'm coming into a 3rd book that ends this trilogy, having never read it before, I was really excited about it. But I like the book. I'm probably going this too soon, but I like the book, but not as much as I thought I was going to.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Well, like you, this was my first time reading this book, but it had also been the first time reading the previous 2 books as well. So, I hadn't read any Shatnerverse books beyond The Return before reading them for this podcast. So, definitely a lot of things that I haven't really been exposed to in this whole, I'd almost say, side universe, right? Because it's not, it does follow the continuity like the other books do, but, neither of them really acknowledge the other, I guess. So, you'll never get reference to Kirk being alive in the main novel verse.
No.
It's just, it kind of, it exists separately. But yeah, I jumping ahead like you, I enjoyed this one, but we'll get to, our final thoughts and ratings for sure.
Yeah, I think with the Shatnerverse books, it's exactly what you said. The authors do not refer to them. I'm sure they're allowed to hint to some things or maybe, make a wink to the books, but it doesn't fit. They're not supposed to follow the continuity in their books. But you're right. When we get to later books and we get to the next trilogy, there are some things in those books that do fit into the continuity that we get later in the novels. So you read them and you think, oh, this is part of the current novel verse, but then when you read the books and novels, they never refer, like you said, to Kirk being alive or any of these events that happen. So yeah, I guess you can say it is like a side universe to the novel verse.
The first thing that I kind of wanted to talk about is the whole idea of the preservers. So basically all we know from canon is that the preservers in the few centuries ago in our own history transplanted a group of native North Americans from Earth to this planet, and there's a big obelisk on it, and it deflects asteroids. And from that, this whole mythology has been built around the preservers and what they do and who they are. So this, kind of enigmatic group that is billions of years old, they kind of link them in this book to the ancient humanoids from The Chase. And I think they're kind of implying they're the same people. and they're kind of this uber powerful super race who have a hand in, manipulating galactic events and all that kind of stuff. I kind of wanted just your first impressions. What do you think about how they were portrayed in this novel? How do you feel the preservers come across here?
Well, we don't actually see the preservers in the book. They're mainly referred to. Well, I guess later we kind of see them in a sense. But anyway, I don't know where I've read this before, and it was recent, but the whole idea that the question comes up, are these preservers the only preservers? Were there multiple preservers? And then I think there was mention too, well, how do we know the preservers don't look like us or like Klingons or other races and such like that? So, I think their portrayal is keeping in line with what we've been hinted at and what we've seen in the series, but just kind of making them a little more mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel like we really got a concrete answer of, about the preservers. There's a lot of speculation going on in this.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot. There seemed to be like a lot of times they'd be discussing, either their preservers or some other theory or something like that. And there'd be like 5 different things they're talking about. Like, oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. But they say, well, we think it's this. And then they just go with that.
Yeah. And not only do they say, oh, we think it's this, and they go with that, then you get later in the book and then they say, it's not that, it's this. And of course, I'm just using McCoy as an example. I'd be like, wait, what are you talking about? I thought they were this. Well, we thought that was it, but now we think it's this. It just keeps changing.
Yeah. I kind of liked the speculation that maybe, it was different groups of people over the course of centuries and that kind of thing. But the one thing that does link them all together are these obelisks, these huge objects like was in the temple, basically, that Kirk found on that planet with Miramani and his whole adventures there, the episode being the Paradise Syndrome in season 3 of TOS. And, this idea that this race has seeded these all over the place to make corrections and to do things over the course of history. It's kind of, it really is this kind of epic idea and this epic scale, which is really interesting. And I know it's not the novel's job to give us definitive answers and to pin everything down, every single fact, but I definitely wanted to learn more about the preservers and why they're doing this and what their ultimate goal is.
I would like to know more. I don't think we see more of the preservers in the later Shatnerverse novels. I don't recall. Maybe. It's been a long time since I've read those. But, it's one of those things where I'd like to sit down with this novel and other novels about preservers and read them all together and just have like a preserver readathon and just see how all those books would tie together. I know that all Star Trek books don't necessarily work together, and some take one road, some take the other. But every time I read a novel, I always think that there's some truth to it. That if there's if there really is a Star Trek universe out there that's for real, we're getting bits and pieces of truth that really makes up what the Star Trek universe is. And so when I read a novel like this, I think, okay, maybe there have been different races and different generations of preservers out there, and maybe they are a lot of what we've thought about before, or maybe they're not. I know I'm being vague, but I almost feel like I'm doing what the book is doing and saying they are this and maybe they're not that. And I just feel like there's a lot more to figure out about them. I want to go dig and find out more somewhere else and kind of put those puzzle pieces together. Even though the authors didn't work together to do that, it would be interesting to see what kind of conclusion you come up with. Say, this is kind of the overall impression of who the preservers really are.
Mm-hmm. I was kind of thinking as I was reading, and the book doesn't really break the fourth wall this way or really nudge you in this direction. But I was thinking kind of almost in a tongue-in-cheek way that the preservers were like the stand-ins for the creators of Star Trek and the writers and that sort of thing. Because they're crafting the universe and, who made the decision for Captain Kirk to become the captain of the Enterprise at such a young age? Well, it was Gene Roddenberry. It was the guy who wrote it. So, I was kind of thinking in the back of my mind, oh, the preservers are like, the producers and the writers of Star Trek. Kind of, what Far Beyond the Stars did literally, I thought maybe Preserver was doing kind of figuratively, but obviously they're not going to really bring that idea into the story itself. That would be way too meta for a, Star Trek novel to be taken seriously kind of thing. But it's kind of in the back of my mind that like, yeah, the producers or the preservers, they're the ones that are making all the decisions and shaping the universe the way we see it.
I love that. That's an interesting point there. And that's the other thing I like about this is it almost portrays things as not being a coincidence. I mean, when you watch TV series and movies and in novels and stuff in this universe, there's things that just seem to happen very easily. And now we can look at things and say, well, Kirk became a captain early in age. He was the youngest captain. Well, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe it's not just because, oh, he's just so good at it. Maybe there was something else behind that. And so all these coincidences and, oh, that was just too easy, or, oh, it just so happens that person happened to be there at that time. Because anytime you watch something on TV or a movie and you see something like that, like, oh, that's a little too convenient, it just so happens that that person was there, or whatever. Now we can say for Star Trek, well, maybe because the preservers were behind that, because they're actually predicting the future based on patterns. Because there's certain patterns that we ourselves have a habit of doing that they're able to look at it and say, okay, I know where this is going because of the patterns I've seen in humanity. And based on those patterns of history with humanity, this is ultimately where things are going. So I can steer it in different directions if I want to.
Right. Which brings us to the whole concept of the psychohistorians, which I thought was really interesting. So we've got these people whose entire study of history is based on the decisions of people, but not usually individual people, more mass populations as a whole and trends and kind of, like you said, reading patterns and finding things out like that. And according to these psychohistorians, a population of merely 7 billion or whatever on one planet isn't enough to do this. You need like a huge population. And of course, the Federation qualifies. So, using data from all of this, they're able to find kind of patterns that are happening and pinpoint where things are going and where they've come from and that sort of thing. And they determine that the universe is going to end in a few weeks kind of thing. Which I thought was interesting because they're interested in these broad, big trends, but then they discover, very, very fine, minute details that have a huge effect kind of thing. I don't know. What did you think of the psychohistorians and kind of how they operate?
I loved this part of the story because it reminds me of where I work, which is a weather company. I'm not a meteorologist, but I work near meteorologists. And that's exactly what they do. They're looking at patterns of what's happening in weather. And based on those patterns, they're able to predict fairly closely what's going to happen that next day. So when you're watching and you're getting your forecast, it's that same thing. And it's not 100% guarantee. That's why when they say, oh, there's a 70% chance of rain, that doesn't mean they don't know 100% sure what's going to happen, but they have a pretty good idea that it's more likely going to rain. And I think that's what's going on here. It's that same thing. It's like looking at the patterns of, like you said, a mass population of humanity. And based on what they're doing at the time, well, there's this, probably a 70% chance that the universe is going to explode.
It reminds me of, like, you're talking about meteorologists. It reminds me of that cartoon where it shows, the weather report for Alderaan. It's,
Yes.
70 degrees 85 degrees. And then the next day it's like 9,428 degrees and fire. And yeah, it's
Exploding planets. Yes.
I think the world may end on this day.
Yeah. And so it would be great if we could all just sit here and predict exactly what's going to happen and be prepared for it. But we're not as smart as these guys are.
Yeah, definitely. And, their work kind of leads me to think about, the ideas of free will versus predestination kind of thing. Like, are we just kind of at the whim of the vagaries of fate, as they say? Or in this case, the preservers, basically the story reveals that they have a hand in a ton of decisions, right? So they interfere basically in, at all levels. They generate false orders that assign captains to various positions and move people into positions so they're in the right place at the right time. And it occurs to me, we've got the preservers doing this on a macro level for billions of years. We've got Uri messing around in the Federation since, the early days of Enterprise. And there was one more that popped into my head. I can't remember now, but, we've got all these forces that are manipulating everything. Is there any room for free will for anybody?
Yeah. Do we ever make our own decisions?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the same criticism that people had of David Mack's Section 31 novel Control, that, are we as the Federation where we are because of our free will and what we've decided, or is it because of what Control or Uri has led us to? And I think David was very good at pointing out the time that when we reviewed this book, that we're still making free will decisions. It's like the parent nudging the child, like maybe pushing him in the pool. Like, you can swim. I'm just going to give you a little push to get you in the water to actually do it, And I almost feel like that's what we're seeing here with the preservers. And I want to touch on that whole thing about the preservers and Uri from Control, because it made me wonder. And I know, again, these novels necessarily aren't related, but I like to pretend that there's some truth among them all, that there is a connection. I wonder if the preservers had something to do with the creation of Uri.
I have to admit, when I was reading, those thoughts were in my head as well. I mean, these are books that are separated by about close to 20 years in publication. Anyway, I think this was 2000.
Yes.
And so 2017, so 17 years publishing difference. Obviously William Shatner and Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens would know nothing about Control or Uri, and I doubt that David Mack had this in mind when he wrote Control. But yeah, that's the joy of these novels. Like you said earlier, each novel has a little piece of the Star Trek universe, and when you read a new novel, you incorporate it and weave it in, and maybe it doesn't always fit perfectly, but every once in a while there's, something that dovetails really nicely and makes you go, I wonder, And yeah, that totally did this for me as well. I was kind of wondering, like, we've got all these forces that are, subtly manipulating events. And, I would make the case. I totally agree with David Mack with regards to Control and Uri. I think if someone was angry about what Control said about the Star Trek universe, they should be 10 times angrier about this novel and its revelations and what the preservers were doing, because I think this is a much more apparent manipulation than what we saw in Control. To me anyway, it seems like the preservers have this end goal and they're manipulating everybody to be in a particular place at a particular time to try and move things exactly the way they want it, which, obviously is to our benefit, I think, given what we learn about the nature of the mirror universe versus ours, but still feels very much like we're totally at the whims of some vast bigger power than us, if that makes sense.
Well, of course, that's also what is found in religion. There's a vast power in God, and God is probably leading us in certain directions. And again, not necessarily controlling everything that we do. We have some free will, but also guiding us. And the preservers may be guiding us. And I don't know if it's really because they are trying to help us or save us, or possibly they are just experimenting with us. Are we lab rats? I mean, we're talking billions of years of things going on, and to the preservers, that may be a small amount of time, and they're still just doing some experiments with us. And, they're just changing the course just to see how we respond. And maybe it's a game in some ways to them, because if they're following certain patterns and they're predicting what's going to happen, maybe this is all a game of, hey, we're going to, push things a little this direction and see if what's going to happen is going to happen as we predict, and see how close we get each time. I don't know what's motivating the preservers. Did you figure out what it is why they're doing what they're doing?
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, my brain went to all kinds of places in this book, which is, a testament to the story. I mean, a good story should make you think and make you ponder big questions. It led me to the idea like, well, is, something that philosophers talk about a lot, is our universe, are our lives just a simulation running somewhere? And are we just, another simulation on a preserver computer somewhere? And they're going, okay, well, that didn't work. Wipe, start again. They're so far above us, apparently, that, it could be something like that. I do have to also say, I love your bringing up God and religion, because there's one part in this book that I highlighted and I loved it, where Picard, they're talking about the preservers, and Picard turns to Kirk and says, Jim, why would preservers need to travel around the galaxy in Starfleet vessels? Right. Kirk kept his smile to himself. He seemed to recall asking a similar question on a different mission long ago. And of course, it pops immediately into your head. What does God need with a starship? And it was at that moment I was like, oh, they're kind of subtly comparing the preservers to God. So I thought that was a really interesting. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that definitely popped into my head as well. And at that point, you kind of say to yourself, well, what is the difference?
Yeah. Funny how a novel written by William Shatner makes a reference to a movie directed by William Shatner.
Imagine that.
Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Yeah, we should have had William Shatner on here to talk about this novel and ask him these questions of why he did this with the preservers and what his intentions were. Yeah,
for sure. I think he would have those answers probably readily available right off the top of his head.
Well, he would quickly make something up if he didn't remember.
As any good writer would do, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the other thing that this brought to mind was, not only is our idea of free will brought into question by the existence of the preservers and the direct manipulation that they're taking, but also just this whole idea of psychohistory and the idea that patterns make our actions totally predictable. So even if you take the preservers completely off the board, and I realize this is a huge philosophical question and scientific question that we are not going to be able to answer on a podcast about Star Trek novels, do we have free will, or is the fact that history is so totally predictable based on the actions of populations, is that proof that there is no free will and that we're all just cogs in the great machine that is the universe moving forward? And, I'm going to get up and go to work tomorrow because I always got up and went to work tomorrow, and I have no actual say in that decision.
Well, I can actually answer this question because I have more than one brain.
Oh, right. Yes, I forgot.
Well, going back to what I was saying about meteorologists, I remember one of them saying to me, when we say there's a 50% chance of rain, it doesn't mean that we're saying we're predicting that there's a 50% chance that it's going to rain. What we're really saying is that based on the patterns that we're seeing right now, half of the time it has rained in the past based on historical information. So that's really what it's saying when they're saying 50% chance. It's really saying 50% of the time it has rained when these patterns begin to happen. So when it comes to our history and our free will, I wouldn't say that our actions are predictable. I would say that based on certain patterns, we've had a history of certain events happening. So like you're saying when you're going to work, we know that there's a pattern that every weekday you go to work and the result is that you get there. And so there's a 99% chance that tomorrow morning when you go to work, you're going to get to the office, and we base that on history. But there's may have been times in the past where you went to work and somehow didn't get there. Maybe you got into a fender bender, or maybe you got called to visit someone in the hospital because you heard that a friend of yours got sick and you need to go a different direction, or whatever it is. And so based on that historical pattern, we can predict to a certain percentage what is going to happen the next day. 99% chance that Dan's going to get to work tomorrow because 99% of the time that he has left the house, he got to work. So I wouldn't say it's predictable, but we know fairly close what will probably happen. So I would say, yes, we still have free will. Thank you for listening to Meta Treks. I'm Bruce Gibson.
Excellent. Well, I think I'm just going to not go to work tomorrow then. And then I'll have finally beat the odds and I'll go and buy a lottery ticket. Because 99% chance, I'm the 1%, I made that 1%. So my odds are really good that day, right? I think that's how it works.
Yeah, that's why so many people win the lottery.
Exactly. Actually, isn't it? I'm pretty sure this is how statistics work, isn't it? You either do or you don't. It's 50-50, right? You either do or you don't. No, I'm just kidding. I hate it when people say that. Fundamental. Somewhere right now, Amy Nelson is just like looking around going like, what's that feeling?
See, we're getting into math. I told you I was better at math than I was about literature.
Excellent. No, that was really cool. I love that explanation because I look at the weather report and I see 50% chance of rain, and it occurs to me now, I just never really understood what that meant or where that calculation came from. So that's really cool. Thank you.
You are very welcome.
I learned something new today. So another thing that this book addresses, which, I found kind of a pleasant surprise because it's one of those things in the original series that comes up a lot, the duplicate Earths we see in the original series. So for example, in the episode Miri, we see an exact duplicate of Earth. They're all gasping on the bridge. Oh my God, it's another Earth. And then in another episode, when they see another Earth, they say, oh, it's an example of Hodgkin's law of parallel planet development. But we'll ignore that because this book ignores that as well. What did you think of this idea of these duplicate Earths being, possible experiments by the preservers? I have to admit, I never thought of them as being artificially created, but that's kind of a theory that the book comes up with and they talk about a bit.
I thought it was brilliant. Thank you, William Shatner. I thought it was brilliant because, again, when you watch the TV series, we know there's budget constraints, and so they're using existing sets on the movie set lots, and so if you have a Western town, we're going to use the Western lot for this story because the buildings are here. We can use them, and we have images of Earth, and we can throw that up on the view screen, and so we have budget constraints, and so we're going to work in that there's a duplicate Earth that and there can be all kinds of theories as to why, but it's interesting that when you have the preservers come in, and the theory is that the preservers created these duplicate, not just Earths, but Kronos and Vulcan and some others, so on and so forth. There's duplicate worlds out there, and if they're artificially created, I thought it was also, I'm sorry. If they're artificially created, what are they created for? And now, again, there's some truth in the novels that lead into the truth of the Star Trek universe. And it's almost like, okay, the theory is that these worlds were created by the preservers for experiments. But again, we don't know exactly for sure why they were created. And I like then in the novel, it's presented, well, were those worlds created after our Earth, or is our Earth artificial? Are we the experiment?
Yeah, that was kind of a mind-blowing moment for sure. And I was like, whoa, I never thought of that. Did you think of, because this is what immediately popped into my head, of course, was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I was like, oh, Earth was created as a giant computer to calculate the ultimate question to the answer of life, the universe, and everything, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's why Earth was created.
And the preservers had something to do with that too.
Are the preservers just the little white mice that created Earth? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Or other universes. Are the preservers the ones creating other universes? All these questions come up from the Federation from years ago as to why are there so many duplicates out there? Not in just worlds, but also in universes.
Mm-hmm. I didn't really like the way that question was just dismissed in the book, where they're like, oh, this was just a weird mystery to throw us off the scent of what they're really after, or something like that.
Yeah, they did. They said that, oh, okay, yeah, all this stuff is just to throw us off course. So we can't figure some things out. And it's like, really? So the preservers create different worlds and universes that are duplicates just so they throw the scent off?
Yeah, that seemed like almost a very self-centered, arrogant conclusion to come to. They knew that we'd be so smart that they'd have to create this huge mystery to throw us off the trail. Like,
but then again, they don't seem to really know what's going on. That's why they keep changing their minds and the theories keep changing. So they may have said that, but that doesn't mean it's truth.
Right. That might not be the ultimate conclusion for sure.
Right. Only one person can answer that question. That's David Mack.
Exactly. We know who the true preserver is.
Right. Uri himself.
Excellent. Absolutely. Well, and another thing in this novel, of course, is the idea of, and this is carried on from the previous novels, of course, secret organizations within Starfleet. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, this is the first book that they actually do make reference to, the ultimate secret organization within Starfleet that we know and love to hate, Section 31. There's one tiny reference to it where I think Dr. M'Benga says Dr. Bashir warned her to stay away from groups that don't answer to the Federation. And he said it in a way that sounded like he might know something personally about that, but she didn't really press him. So I was like, oh, there we go. So yeah, I'm curious.
I just want to say, I thought that part was interesting because I was reading the book. I kept thinking, this sounds like Section 31. Mm-hmm. And I thought, did we know of Section 31 from Deep Space Nine yet at this point when this book was written? And the fact that it was published in 2000, I thought, well, yeah, I think we knew at that point, or maybe this book was done before we knew that. But that little part there that you're mentioning, that was the hint that we did know of Section 31 because the reference to Bashir. So I thought it was interesting that, I guess that's what we're getting into, but that this kind of is a parallel to that.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so by the time this book was released and probably written, Section 31 was out and that was all known about. But what I'm wondering is the previous two books, I don't think Inquisition, Deep Space Nine Season 6, had aired yet. So it's kind of interesting, this kind of parallel, development. And without thinking, I remember when we were reading the other books, I was thinking to myself, why aren't they bringing up Section 31? Like this sounds like them. Why aren't they linking that? And it occurs to me, oh, that probably hadn't even been written or aired yet. So, but by this point, it's kind of cool that two different sources have kind of traveled along the same path to link those two together.
They didn't really specify if Project Sign is a part of Section 31 or a separate organization of Section 31. Because as you mentioned, there's just brief reference to, and there's that organization that Dr. Bashir has dealt with.
Yeah, it was just a very brief, if you as a reader are paying attention, it's kind of the authors saying, yeah, we know. There's that other one out there. We're not linking it to it, but we know it's there. Don't worry, we're not just ignoring it, kind of thing.
So this, in my mind, I was thinking, well, there's no way that Project Sign wouldn't know about Section 31 and vice versa.
Right.
I think if anything, if one didn't know the other, it would be that maybe Project Sign wouldn't know about Section 31. Because I just kept thinking that Section 31 has been around longer, because the Project Sign really started off as called Project Magnet, and it was estimated that it happened right after the events of the episode Mirror Mirror as a result of the Mirror Universe. So we're talking, 2267, and we know that Section 31 started at least a century before that. So in my mind, and based on what we were saying earlier, I was thinking preservers lead to Uri, which leads to Section 31, which leads to Project Magnet to Project Sign. Mm-hmm. That these are all the results in that order.
It's kind of like trying to keep track of, Dayton Ward talking about his UFO groups in the U.S. government, Project Blue Book and all that. Like what one leads to the other, leads to the other, leads to the other. And I love we're getting to the point in Star Trek history where it's almost as convoluted and as crowded as real history is. I mean, there's so much stuff in Star Trek lore to draw upon.
Absolutely. See, this is what I love about reading Star Trek books, because this is what got me really into Star Trek. As I said earlier, I watched the movies when I was younger. I started watching TNG when it came on air, but it wasn't until I started reading the books where all of a sudden this kind of stuff started playing in my head, because I hadn't watched every episode of the original series when I started reading the novels. And then when I started watching the original series, I'm picking up on things that I had read in the novels. So a lot of fans see the TV episodes and then see, this book relates to this episode. I was coming in the opposite. I'm like, that's in this book. I almost felt like each episode was relating to a book and not the other way around. But there's all these little things that I was like, there's like this web of connections. And even though it's not perfect, it's like you're saying, our own history isn't perfect. We have different versions of it. And we try to come to, what is the closest that we can get to what maybe actually happened. And that's how I feel when I read all these books. I know it's all fiction and we have different creators all behind these things, and they're not all working together. But in my mind, there's a way to get these things, for the most part, to all fit in and give clues as to what the universe really might be doing and what's happening in the Star Trek universe, without always discounting and saying, this must take place in a parallel universe, or this is an alternate universe, or whatever. It's like there's these hints and clues that give us a big, broader canvas of this big picture of a complex Star Trek universe. See, I'm just geeking out now. Now you're getting to my passion about all this.
So you're saying we need a Star Trek murder wall. We need, the different pictures and the pins and the red string linking all the little bits, from one to the other. Section 31, it started here, and it, all these little elements linking, the weird temporal anomalies that must have allowed Kirk and company to do 28 years worth of missions within one 5-year mission.
Yes, seriously. Yes. Actually, I think this is what Christopher L. Bennett's house looks like. I really do. When he writes the DTI
I wish
novels.
Everybody listening could see Bruce's face right now, because it is just lit right up. He's like a kid on Christmas morning, and I love it.
Seriously, when Christopher L. Bennett writes the DTI novels, I always think he's got to have a board like that. I swear he does. I want to go to his house and just to see if that exists, because I'm convinced that he has to have something like that going on. And yeah, that's essentially what I'm getting at, is that, there's some connection somewhere between all these things that give us an ultimate view of what this complex Star Trek universe could be. And that's what I'm hoping again with Discovery. It's like people are like, there's no way that Discovery could blah, blah, blah 10 years before Kirk because of blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh no, you just never saw it before. This is going to open up all new doors.
Oh, exactly. Oh man, I could go on a rant here, but it's like, I don't want a small, tiny little Star Trek universe where everything looks just so and, blah, blah. No, blow it wide open. Like, I want to see every corner of the Star Trek universe and examine every little thing here and there and make it all fit together. Like, and also, I mean, this is a tangent, but I also have faith in the Discovery writers when they say they found a little niche in the Star Trek universe that they want to explore, and they picked that year for particular reasons, and they have a great story they want to tell. I totally believe them. Go to town. Like, I want to see what you guys come up with. But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's like when people say that, like, their Star Trek has to fit in this little tiny box and nothing can ever deviate from that. I'm like, no, that's so limiting. Like, I want to see everything. Oh man. Anyway,
well, that's why
rant.
we like reading books, because it expands beyond what we've seen. It's beyond that little box. When you watch the original series, every ship pretty much is a Constitution class vessel. And now when I see images of the USS Discovery, I don't know the exact size of it, but in a lot of ways, I think it looks bigger than what the USS Enterprise is at that time. And my first thought is, no, that can't be. And I'm like, no, wait, it can be. I mean, just in my mind, it's always been every century or so, the ships just keep getting bigger. Every Enterprise gets bigger. You look at the NX-01, and then we, go through every USS Enterprise, and they just get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like, well, who says that starships' time and size are related? I mean, we could just watch the original series, and it's all about, we see Constitution class starships, but that doesn't mean there's other ships out there that are totally different, that are bigger and smaller than that starship. And that comes back to these novels, and what we're talking about with this one is that we're finding out more things that we didn't know before. We didn't know there was a Project Sign. That was never an episode. How can you put that in the book? There was never a Project Sign in any episode. Well, so what? Now there is. You just didn't know about it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, how many times in your day-to-day life, going around talking with people, going through your daily routine, do you bring up the city of Nairobi? I mean, probably not very often, but it exists. It's out there. If somebody brought up, the city of Nairobi to you tomorrow, you can't say, well, that's not a real city. Nobody's mentioned it for the last 10 years that I've noticed, Oh, come on. It's a big universe. It's a big galaxy. It's a big world. There's lots of stuff out there we've never heard of, and writers can mention it, and then now you've heard of it.
Well, and it's also with people. And again, not to go off on Discovery, but people were saying about, the main character being related to Spock in some way or whatever, and I'm not going to go into that. And it was like, well, Spock hasn't mentioned anything about it. Well, yeah, but you know what? I can think of times, like, for example, there's somebody at work that we found out something about him. We've known him for years, and all of a sudden it's like, how come we never knew this about him? We didn't know that 20 years ago he did blah, 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 blah. Why?
Exactly.
It's like, we don't talk about everything all the time. I mean, I found out that somebody had been married multiple times and it never came up before. It doesn't mean I can go, no, wait, there's no way you're on your third marriage because you never mentioned the other two ever before.
Exactly. And Spock in particular, sorry, this is the last bit of this tangent, but Spock in particular has always been really not forthcoming about his family. I mean, they meet Sarek and Amanda on the Enterprise, and they like greet each other, and oh, that was cool. Hey, Spock, since we're on Vulcan, maybe you should beam down and see your folks. And he's like, Ambassador Sarek is my dad. Like, he's an ambassador in the Federation, and you didn't know he was Spock's dad.
Right.
Yeah, he's going to be talking about his human adopted sister all the time, I'm sure.
Yep.
Anyway, all of that aside, let's get back to Preserver. Thanks for being patient through the digression. And we're kind of getting into, well, actually, before we get to this, I want to talk a little bit about the two Kirks. We got a little bit about Kirk versus Kirk in the last novel. In this novel, they really took their story in a direction I wasn't expecting. The two of them and we're getting into the ending here, so we're getting into spoilers. They end up crossing into the mirror universe together and kind of in a weird way working together. And there were a few times where they seem to be not so much trusting Tiberius, but like giving him a bit of a long leash, which I found really unexpected. I was kind of like, this, and I mean, I guess it's kind of the lesson of the book really in the end, but he's done some really terrible, really horrible things. And I think he gets off pretty lightly personally. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts about this, but they're not really, I'm not really putting them together really well. What did you think of that whole aspect of the story?
I didn't expect to see the two working together. They didn't necessarily trust one another or have full respect for one another. I don't know if because that they in some ways are essentially the same person, that there's this weird dynamic between them, a love-hate in a sense. I didn't feel like the writing of that of this book really clarified that in any way to us. I thought he did, the Mirror Kirk, or Tiberius as he's referred to, got off a little easy because towards the beginning of the book, we see that he is eventually and sets it up to try to kill James Kirk of our universe. And of course, Kirk always gets out of a mess and, he's back. But then they're, hanging around together. And the Federation is just letting Tiberius run around with James Kirk. And I'm like, he tried to kill him. Like, what?
Yeah.
Wait, what? I don't understand why. I mean, they feel like the preservers are after Tiberius. And so they're kind of using Tiberius as bait. But I felt like, yeah, he had a long leash to do whatever he wanted to do.
And I felt like our Kirk, in quote marks, Kirk, was okay with working with Tiberius really quickly, they make a few mentions about like when they're putting each other's spacesuits on, for example, and checking the seals. They're like, oh, the last time we did this, we were trying to kill each other. They're each thinking in their heads and like, oh, this is weird. And then they go back to what they're doing kind of thing. Like it seemed to be acknowledged here and there, but I was just like, I don't know if I'm buying these two working together in any kind of circumstances like this. But
I'm with you on that.
I don't know.
I think we both agree on that.
All right, cool. Well, I just wanted to be like, dude, Tiberius. Anyway, so getting into the end of this book, and again, like I said, we're into the end. We're into big spoilers here. This whole idea of Kirk not getting a happy ending. So McCoy at one point says that Kirk is the happiest he's been in a long time because he's with Teilani. But, and again, spoilers, I'm warning everybody big time here. If you haven't read this book and you want to and you don't want to be spoiled. But by the end of this book, Teilani has sacrificed herself to save the captain and Captain MacDonald of the Pathfinder in this case. And she's died a hero's death. Now, man, like Kirk, like you say in the notes here, he just can't catch a break. I mean, wouldn't we love for Kirk to just retire and settle down with the love of his life and live happily ever after? Why can't he do that? Why do we have to keep torturing this guy? And why do we, even separate from Kirk, I'm really sad to lose the character of Teilani, who in her own right, I think was an amazing character with a lot of really interesting potential, not just for the way she relates to Kirk, but in and of herself too.
Yeah, she was really growing on me as a character. And she was really developing. And I'm disappointed that she's gone. I knew she was going to die, having not read this book, but read the books that come after this. I've read some of those, so I knew it was coming. I just didn't know how. I found some of this book to be a bit depressing because everything that Kirk has been through, and then fast forward to the 24th century, and he's found happiness. He's with his now wife, and then she has a baby, which we didn't talk about, but his son Joseph is born, and he's kind of like I don't like, they refer to him as a monster. He doesn't come out well. I mean, he's alive, and I guess he's healthy in a sense. I mean, they're still working on him. I think by the time we get to the end of the book, he's, they're still kind of dealing with it. And then his wife dies. It's like, oh my gosh, when can we have him ride out into the sunset? I just don't feel like Kirk is ever going to reach a point that he finds true happiness and grows old and dies. But then again, life isn't fair, and I guess we all would like a life that's going to ride out into the sunset and happy, and we don't have a guarantee of that. The only way we would know what's going to happen towards the end of our lives is if we study the patterns, and we can predict those things.
Yeah. No, I mean, there was... I know why they did it. I know why they got rid of Teilani. I mean, it's kind of been a recurring thing in these last few books that, he wants to be settled down with Teilani and he wants to raise a family with her. But the Kirk that we know and love is out among the stars, adventuring and that sort of thing. So you can't keep having this recurring thing where he, wants to be on the planet, but gets pulled away somehow. That gets old. And I remember thinking while I was reading this book, like, man, they're doing this again where he wants to stay with her and she wants him to stay with her, but he's leaving again. And they can't keep doing this. And I had no idea they were going to kill her off at the end of this book, other than the little bit of foreshadowing here and there that you kind of in retrospect realize. But I had no idea, like, really that this was coming. But in retrospect, it makes total sense. I mean, they want, without having read the future books, in my mind, I think, they want Kirk out among the stars and not tied down. It's just too bad that they had to do it that way, They have to set up this really amazing character that I, like you, have really come to like, and then, kill her off in, a hero's death for sure. But still, it was just like, really? Did we have to go that way? Anyway.
Well, I can add to this too, because I remember reading years ago in an interview, and I think I may have mentioned this a little bit on another show, but as William Shatner is working on these novels with Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens, he's coming up with story ideas, and they're basically the ones writing the books, but he's working with them and they're working with him to come up with story ideas. So there's a lot of things about his life at the time of these books that he's putting in his story suggestions.
Oh.
His wife passed away a year before this book.
Right. Yeah.
She was found.
I didn't even put that together.
Yeah, she was found dead in the swimming pool at their house. And he doesn't really deal with the death in this book because the death happens at the end. But I know in later books, there's, Kirk dealing with the death of Teilani, and he was putting a lot of his thoughts and emotions into those books based on what he experienced with his previous wife's death. So
right. Wow, that makes sense.
I don't know if when he had conversations with the other authors, if he's like, well, my wife died last year, and so let's kill Teilani at the end of the book. Probably not. I don't know, but maybe they sold him on the idea of like, what if we killed Kirk's wife at the end of the book, and in future books we have Kirk deal with her death, just and you can write to that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm just throwing that out there. There's some connection between that. I remember hearing that in an interview years ago.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm kind of kicking myself for not putting that together while I was reading this. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's why you have me and my two brains.
Exactly. This is why we talk about Star Trek novels every week, because, like we've said before, it, oftentimes we'll come out of a discussion with a completely different view of a book than when we started, because, we had this opportunity to hash out the ideas. And I hope that, listeners out there, that we're doing that for you as well, that you can engage with the book on a different level and, almost take part in this virtual conversation that we have about these books. So speaking of how our views on the book may or may not have changed since before this discussion started, Bruce, why don't you share your final thoughts and a rating for Preserver?
I have said this multiple times, and I'm going to say it on other shows. I know it's going to come up, but I start to appreciate some books more once we start talking through it, because it's like you said, Dan, you bring new ideas to the table that I didn't think of, or say something that sparked something in my head that didn't come to mind at the time. And I'm not saying I really like this book that much more than I did before we started recording this episode, but I think there's a lot. I didn't realize that there's a lot more here than I thought. So I would say it's a very good read. It got us talking about a lot of different topics, which Star Trek is supposed to do. It's added some rich elements to the universe, like the duplicate worlds and the preservers and such. So I'm going to say that there's an 85% chance that I really like this book.
Nice. I like that. Excellent. Well, yeah, like you, I really enjoy this hashing out of ideas, and a lot of times it really does change what I think about the books that we talk about. I think in this case, I'm still pretty much in line with what I thought when we first started talking about it. I like a lot of the ideas in the book. I like big picture, big scope stuff. However, a lot of times I felt like it was kind of muddled. Like there was just a little bit of a mishmash of stuff going on. And a lot of times it didn't really seem to coalesce until, the last minute when, oh, we figured out they're doing this. Oh, they're going to detonate all the dilithium and it's going to do this. Oh, okay. So we got to do that. And then some of the character stuff, we didn't really get into this, but Captain McDonald, I was really confused by her behavior and based on what we knew of her in the previous books. And here again is a character that I was really starting to like in the previous books. And then here, man, her character just takes a left turn and I know she's not a real person and I don't necessarily need to respect her decisions. It's, what the writers do with her.
It's like she became the mere McDonald.
Yeah, like it was just, it was seemingly out of left field. And, when she's on her shattered bridge and she's screaming vengeance at Picard and telling her crew to target the Enterprise's bridge, I'm going, okay, let's step back here. What's bothering you? Like, wow, like just totally off the deep end. Yeah. And so just certain little things in the novel rubbed me the wrong way. I don't want to say all bad things. I had an enjoyable time reading this book. It was fine, but just stuff like that really rubbed me the wrong way, which makes me have to give this one 3 out of 5 Preserver obelisks. Now, that's not a bad rating. If you look on Goodreads, the 5-star system, for example, 1 star is I didn't like it, 2 stars is it was okay, and 3 stars is I liked it. And, I liked this one, but it just, it took away those 2 stars by just kind of being a little confused in some areas and some parts that just bugged me,
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I agree with you 100% on that. There were things, Captain McDonald just seemed way off. Like I kept expecting that we were going to hear a reason more why this was happening, but it just seemed extreme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, that's 2 of the 3 Shatnerverse trilogies in the can. We got the 2 done. We've got another trilogy out there. Don't know exactly when we're going to do those books, but we're definitely going to hit those at some point here soon.
Is it really just the one remaining trilogy? And then Collision Course was just a single book. But, whenever I looked at the Shatnerverse novels, I always think there's so many of them. I'm never going to get around to reading them, until we started doing these. I had no idea when I was going to do it. But yeah, I guess you're right. There's just the one trilogy left, isn't there?
Yeah, and I remember this last trilogy feeling less like a trilogy than these other books. These books felt more connected as a trilogy. I don't recall this last trilogy. They felt more standalone. There's connections, but I don't know. It's been such a long time, like I said earlier, that's why I want to kind of go back to these, because I'd like to see how these stand up.
Okay, well, that's interesting. But it's been fun talking about Shat narrative trilogies today, but that's not the only thing we've been discussing on the network. So here's a quick look at some of the other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Warp 5.
I just thought, those are where, of course, some of the other Enterprise references come up. He was a Mako, he fought in the Indian Romulan Wars. I really like that background and that tie-in, and it makes sense that, over the course of 100 years, that somebody's going to kind of go a little crazy and get to this point where they're just, seething for some kind of revenge or something. So
The Ready Room.
Of all the things people to wonder about and question and be concerned about canon and visual canon on Discovery, the Klingons haven't concerned me that much, because I think the Klingons are ripe and long overdue for lack of a better term, some species diversity. And one of the things that Star Trek is prey to, and people acknowledge it, but still, we wish it wasn't a limiting factor, was TV budgets.
The 602 Club.
That emotional core, and I tie that too with the mentors that Peter doesn't have throughout the film. There's nobody there to pick up that Uncle Ben slack.
And introducing The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Welcome to The Edge, Trek FM's brand new podcast where we dive into the final frontier of the newest Star Trek series, Star Trek Discovery, the first Star Trek series to be on air in 12 and a half years, something like that.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all of these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review. And if you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
It takes a lot to bring these episodes to you each week, and we'd really appreciate your help. If you'd like to help us keep all of our shows coming to you, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/trekfm, that's patreon.com/trekfm, to get all of the details. Perks can include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, access to the Mirror Universe, where you can prevent the detonation of dilithium, and more, available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month, and we really appreciate any support you can give us, and we hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all of the details at patreon.com/trekfm.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways you can do that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference. It's our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, Babel, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. And if you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Literary Treks, and that will come right to us, and you can find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM.
You can also find us on our Goodreads group, where we have bookshelves with all of our previously covered books, as well as the currently reading section, so you know what's coming up for future shows. Plus, there are great conversations happening about all of the books and comics. Just search for Literary Treks on Goodreads and click Join Group, and we will let you right in. We'd like to thank our associate producers, Ken Tripp, Greg Rosier, and Brandon Chemutala, for their support of the Trek FM network, and specifically for being associate producers for Literary Treks. Well, Bruce, when you're not consulting with psychohistorians and trying to prevent the end of the universe as we know it, where can we find you?
You can find me and my two brains on Twitter at Admiral_Rex, and you can find me talking Star Wars on the Star Wars Report podcast on StarWarsReport.com, And of course, you can find me in the Babel Conference, hopefully talking about this novel with all of you who are listening right now. And Dan, when you're not visiting duplicate worlds, trying to find which is the real one, where can people find you?
Is there even a real one? Like, man, are they all copies of unoriginal? Or are they all just completely artificial?
Anyway, my head's going to explode.
This is the stuff that keeps me up at night. And while I'm up at night, you can find me tweeting into the wee hours on Twitter at Kertrats. That's Kertrats. You can find me making conspiracy theory videos, but not actually, on youtube.com/KertratsProductions. And you can find me on facebook.com/KertratsProductions as well. Well, thank you everyone for listening. And until next time,
live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.